stand for justice, for brighter future. Let's do this together in peace and harmony. CC could take us there to the promised land. No one will stop us now. No, 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 no.
With sincerity, fidelity, and unity, we will achieve the best in Africa. I am the fullest, the return of ancestors. Thank you.
What we are fighting here is so simple. That let there be a plebiscite. Simple.
Ladies and gentlemen, the last thing we heard from this side, with the last speech we had, was that the African Union is in the better position to bring solvency to this. The African Union has been a talk shop for far too long. Talk about situations in Liberia where thousands were killed just because people were agitating for their own rights. The African Union was silent. Talk about issues in Sudan where people were being killed, indigents in country, just because they were fighting for things that were their own rights. There are so many examples you can cite to speak to the very incompetence of the African Union. And this has showed, even now, when there are thousands of people being killed in southern Cameroon in this particular instance. We think the African Union has shown time without number that they're not capable enough to solve the problem. It would obviously be taken out of this particular picture. This debate is retrospective, so we have to look at it from a historical antecedent point of view. So in the instance where it happened, should we find fault in injustices done to citizens of southern Cameroon? That is what the debate is about, and not necessarily talk about what could happen in like an abstract or utopian world, which will obviously not happen. But no, we think the best side of the house that has tackled that issue on retrospect has been the vandal side of the house. Yeah. All we get are more like inspirational messages and speeches, which we obviously applaud them for. When we're talking about things that speak to content and issues of retrospect, you get that more from the vandal side of the house. The next thing we hear from them is that, oh, the plebiscite is the way, and that was like the best thing that we obviously got from them, together with the issue on having a federation. Two things. One, a federation wouldn't have worked and would not work now because France's hold on French West African countries would obviously allow them to do that. Where French West African countries would obviously pay 50% of their reserves to Paris every single year. We see at that particular point in time, it's like holding these French West African countries ransom for things that they obviously are in the fault for. So if you say that allowing for there to be a federation to allow for southern Cameroon to exist within that particular Cameroonian region, it would still not happen because they wouldn't even have full self-autonomy. What we are pushing for is for a people who believe that their identities are tied to one thing and would want to obviously secede and become free. We say that freedom would actually be like acquired or achieved when you allow them to create and carve their own destinies. They would not do that because Paris will not allow them to do that. The same reasons why French West African countries today are fighting for the CFA franc to be blotted or abolished from their economic systems. Countries are fighting for them to introduce their own currencies. Why is that? It's because for like decades, Paris has been like controlling the very economies of these countries. So even if Southern Cameroon joins like the French Cameroonian state or the state as we have it today, they would still not be genuinely free because at the end of the day, they would still have to respond to these kinds of individuals. So when it talks about federation, we say a federation would really not work, allow them to be free to carve their own destinies. That is what Pan-Africanism is about, because we thrive in diversity and we ensure that that unity that binds us together is a narrative that is undying and would exist from now till eternity. Panel, we think if the issue is about a federation, we have barely dealt with that because there are systems and powers that will obviously exist and would avoid that federation from existing. Panel, we think the second issue to talk about is that, on the spirit of determination, that would actually happen. I've already explained to you how Paris will not make this happen. Because Paris has shown time without number, or France has shown time without number, that even assassinations that happen on the African continent, they are directly responsible. Destabilizing governments and countries, they are directly responsible. Talk about like Sudan. There are so many instances where countries that would exist, even colonial powers that would exist, still perpetuate their neo-colonial tendencies, even on these countries still today. So the self-determination bits that these people talk about will not be actualized. Number two, they say the people, though with language and language barrier, should learn to live together. If that would happen, that would have happened in 1951 or like in 1961, when that particular unification happened in the Cameroonian region. And that wouldn't happen today because, of course, there are people being killed and like that kind of language barrier would still exist. My partner already tells you how you can't merge Zambia and South Africa together and say that you have a language barrier. You must still allow Pan-Africanism to exist as a narrative. And so that should happen at all costs. We think it happens when we respect the diversity that exists within these countries. We get more on that from our side when we say the people have been unjustly knitted together, and the time has come for us to put a blade in that knit and ensure that they thrive and exist in their separacy. We think you get more utility on that from my side as far as right. But then more on opposition's case. They say they bid to unite both countries to make them one country. But no, we think this was done at the blind side of identities or like these kinds of people, right? So the identities matter. The reason I would respect a Nigerian and love or crave to wear the Igbo dress is because I have seen the beauty of that, and I obviously want to relate with that. That is in the same instance of a Southern Cameroonian seeing the beauty in the language of like the French Cameroonian would obviously love to learn and not necessarily being forced to exist within that particular domain and like being forced to learn in that particular instance. We think you don't get any utility from that. And the point where you have lawyers being sent from French Cameroon to English Cameroonian states to create and make laws, we think that is even an insult to the very autonomy of these Southern Cameroonians in the first place. But number two, is allowing teachers to exist within these Southern Cameroonian states who are French in nature and will obviously bring up upon their own French identities and things they believe in those Southern Cameroonian states. So at the end of the day, you're only denying these people a chance to self-actualize and like to self-fulfill. We think the best motive for Southern Cameroonians today is for them to self-actualize, but number two, ensure that they speak true to themselves and fight for what they believe in. We think you get more utility in that when we ensure that that is done organically for the long-term gratification or long-term change that we want as an African continent. But secondly, you get more sophisticated analysis from Fatal and Jonas when they tell you that the historical antecedents are ones that are inimical to the very progress of the African continent. But number two, it's entirely disrespects the very essence of being a Southern Cameroonian. You get that more from our side of the house when we tell you that allow the people to fight and allow them to exist and allow them to have their self-autonomy if they wish, if like they so wish. You don't get any mechanization whatsoever from side opposition when they talk about allowing them to exist within that terrain because it is proper to knit two circles together because it is supposed to happen. You can't put like a square peg in a round hole. That is obviously a very bad thing to do because it wouldn't rightly fit in unless you trim the sides. And in trimming the sides is the kind of genocide we are experiencing today in Southern Cameroon, where people are being killed, and to force the will of citizens to exist within a system that will obviously not work for them. We think you get more on our side when we talk about what is best for the Cameroonians. I believe today that Southern Cameroonians will be proud of me for speaking on their behalf and for defending them because we have the very essence of their integrity at stake. We have fought for them, we have stood for their integrity. We believe we've won this, even with the last speech we're going to be getting from the position, from our side as found out. Vimate Shah!
The chair, all protocol duly observed. It seems that our opponents here are trying to play with the emotions of the Southern Cameroons.
Yes.
Now, the question is, the chair, on what context is my opponent claiming fight, in quote? Now, do you mean that this fight you are talking about is going out with guns? Is that a solution? I leave that to your conscience. Please think about it. What we are fighting here is so simple. That let there be a plebiscite. Simple. Do you know something? Kwame Nkrumah said, and I would love to follow his accent, that the independence of our country is meaningless unless it is linked to the total liberation of the whole African continent. And that is why we are fighting for unification here. Remember Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, Sekou Toure? Remember all those people who came together and they were fighting for unification. Our foundation has been so clear and simple. They are trying to just fight for your emotions because they know that when they do that, then they are going to win the debate. But please don't fall for that. And understand one thing. We base our argument on two things. That is unification and let there be a plebiscite. Now let me take you on a journey called the social contract theory. Now you know, according to John Locke, he said that in the state of nature, where now there's a social contract, now the individuals who came together to form the government can actually rebel in a legitimate way. And that is what we call the plebiscite. And that is what our opponents do not understand. Secondly, we are saying that let there be unification. And as my mate rightly said, this would bring out the beauty of Pan-Africanism. If you are talking about Pan-Africanism and you are dealing with fight, then what is the essence of Pan-Africanism? That is the question you have to ask yourself. And you have to understand one thing, and not just by no law at all. If we are talking about Pan-Africanism, we mean unity. If we are talking about Pan-Africanism, as he rightly said, self-actualize. But there can be only self-actualization where there is peace. And that is what Pan-Africanists project. And we are saying that this peace can prevail only when there is unity. Now, I feel so disheartening when my opponents made mention of African Union and begins to pinpoint loopholes in African Union. The truth is that now it is an organization, one. I want to be realistic. It is an organization, one. And the second, you have to understand that every organization has its own advantages and disadvantages. So the fact that it's pushing for the disadvantages of an organization doesn't mean that that organization is false or is bad. African Union has helped, and we can attest to the fact that African Union has helped. Now we know that Cameroon is part of African Union, and if it is going to an extreme, why don't you resort to what we call the diplomacy? You know, they are aiming for fight, and I think it's not good at all. In the 21st century, where we have diplomacy at work, I think we can also resort to that. They tend to mention the word injustice, whilst they have not even come out to define the contextual argument of that injustice they are talking about. They tend to mention justice, while they have not come out to elaborate on how that justice is about. Our argument is simple. And I think you have to understand that. We are pointing out only two things. My fellow brothers, it is so simple. We share the pains and the suffering you guys are going through. But we want you to understand one thing. The solution to this is not fight. Else, it would introduce another year of war, which the Europeans or the Westerns will say, yes, look, they fall for our traps again. The best thing here is for us to unify. That was the dream of Kwame Nkrumah. That was the dream of Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. That was the dream of Gaddafi, that Africa will unite one day. When we had the Casablancan, the Moravian groups, the idea was one, that led them unification. You would attest to the fact that now the problem of Africa has been we failing to unite initially. And as my opponent said, this is the right time. Let's start from this basis. And I know that when we start from this basis, now it would incite other African countries to come out to also say that, yes, our brothers, the Cameroonians, have been able to do this. And we can follow suit. And the church, this is what we project. Unification. And let them be decided. If we are against what is going on, why don't we follow the right procedures to gain what we want to get, rather than just going into fight? And I don't know, I've heard that Commonwealth is usually attached to violence. They try to thank you very much. So he just confirmed it. They try to use their ideological stance in this, and I think it's not the best. Let's go for
Yeah.
Today, not today, nobody go seize us to jubilate. Nelson Mandela and Nkrumah, it's now SCCOP time. Hey, hey, Africa, hey, Africa, hey, Africa, hey. Africa, hey, Africa, hey, Africa, hey. Come together, help your brother, hey, Africa, hey. Dance together, love another, hey, Africa, hey.
Mama Liliana Yutabe, Okume women are behind you. Mama Ambazonia. We live in Paris. Ambazonia declare yo. Levez-vous. Milana Tam, le stratège. Picking for Ambazonia. Honorable Weaver, warrior from Jakiri. Justice Abel. From West Africa, diplomacy, ahead. Wata na wata.